Well, hello, creatives, community, and kind folks out there. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I'm your host, DBJ, getting started a little later, and as a matter of fact, is quite appropriate for today's and this week's subject. For those who don't know, this channel is live broadcast over. Simulcast over on Twitch, YouTube, and a Discord server. And for those who live in the States, you understand that the show goes live each day, Monday through Friday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Well, due to some biological needs, I had to find a porcelain throne and pinch a loaf. Yeah, and as a dead man in the chat, it's like random lateness. Yes, uh, random Hershey squirts, as it were. Okay, maybe a little TMI, maybe a little too much information, but but the idea this week I thought we would argue about are random encounters. Okay, the randomness of life and inserting randomness, or whether you should or shouldn't insert randomness into your tabletop RPG games. So, yeah, and of course, we're going to talk about classically Dungeons and Dragons. Insert some other of your favorite tabletop games in there, but most assuredly, we will focus on Dungeons and Dragons because it's the um, it's the epitome. It is the widestly played game, even if it's a game that you don't like. But it does have a lot of tropes in it, a lot of commonalities, even some historical things that we've kind of embraced for good or bad. So today is Monster Monday, and for those as well who are just joining us, that we take the subject and we'll talk about it all week long. So Monster Monday, Crunch Time Tuesday, etc. But I thought we would start out with what I think might be very odd, and that is, I don't believe we all have the same standard for what a random encounter is in a tabletop role playing game. So I thought we would try. Excuse me. I thought we would try to define it for ourselves and maybe even discover why other people have their definitions and how specified or how random our tabletop RPG definition of random encounters are. Okay, so the first part of this, and we'll get into the nuances of what the difference between an encounter and a combat, right? We'll get into that part, which is pretty easy to define. But many times you'll pick up a module, an adventure path, a book, your latest role-playing game. You'll crack open a Dungeons and Dragons book. Maybe you're the dungeon master, of course, and you have yourself a couple of tables. And sometimes those things might be known as bullet points, where they'll have literally bullet points like a little black dot, or they'll have a little dash mark, or it will be, maybe you'll have a list of things with bold words in the head of it, and they'll have them listed on a page. And sometimes instead of bullet points, they'll have numbers. And within the tabletop RPG community, some, for good or bad, some consider adding numbers to a list of 10 items, or specifically 8 items, or 20 items, or 1 through 100 items, or using numerology to affect the percentages of one random thing happening over another, especially when you start rolling multiple dice to achieve the number you want. Like, for example, a percentile dice, and going, well, any number between 37 and 46 brings about this particular thing. Then that becomes an encounter that is greater to happen because of rolling the dice than say a lesser one, where on rolling a 1 or a 2 on percentile dice, right? And yeah, yeah, and like Dead Man says it. And by the way, Dead Man, this isn't what you're saying is correct, but that's not the only one. Saying Return to the Temple of Elemental Evil had a random encounter table in it and rules saying when to use the table. And that's not reserved for that one module. Classically in Dungeons and Dragons, before, I want to say before third or 3X, they often had random encounter tables in them, more often than a little bit, designed for that adventure. And they had rules for when you would roll it. You many times it was a D6. Back in the BX days, it was a D6, and the die 6, it would be a X in 6 chance of a random encounter given a certain amount of time, 10 minutes, an hour each day. Morning, noon, night, like morning, morning, noon, evening, and then overnight or something. Like it would give you a period of time when to roll, and the X in 6 percentage would go up or down based on player characters' actions. Like it's a 1 in 6 chance normally. It's a 2 in 6 if they're making a lot of noise. It's 3 in 6 if they're not cleaning up, they're leaving blood trails. It's a 4 in 6. Like they would give some kind of modifiers for that. And the idea for the definition of random encounters is that, is it random? Is something a random encounter if the game master picks it from a list without numbers on it? If they go down the list and they go, okay, I like that one. Or if they use that same random list, but they don't bother rolling on it, right? Or when they roll on it, is time a factor? If 3 weeks before the game starts and you grab your random encounter table and you roll on it and you start designing your adventure, is that a random encounter 3 weeks before the game starts and they start to round out the adventure? Maybe they're getting some kind of inspiration by rolling 3 times on the random chart and picking the one that best represents the kind of encounter they want. Is there any difference between 3 weeks before the game starts and coming up with the exact same result that they roll 30 seconds because their players took a left turn, right? And in the Discord, the funny post here by Tesla Ranger is like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and there's Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, facing Hitler. I don't know if you guys remember that in the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade movie, faces Hitler with the book that is supposed to find the Holy Grail, and Hitler looks him in the eye in a crowd, I mean a massive crowd, and Hitler opens the book up, signs it, and hands it back to him, throws it in his chest, and it keeps on walking, right? It's sometimes we'll see that. Heck, any of you that have seen, I don't know, any recent Marvel Cinematic Universe movie ever, and Stan Lee showing up, right? Random encounter. Like, what's he doing there? Why is he a security guard? Why is he Hugh Hefner? Why is he, like Omen says, depending on the emulators you're using, a random encounter works depending on tension rules. And I mean, we're going to talk about this all week long, but like random encounters in many ways were designed. Tesla's like natural 20 on a bluff skill. Hells yes. Oh yeah, that could have gone all kinds of wrong ways, but what were they expecting, right? And if you, I'm pretty sure they weren't expecting, uh, uh, I would guess a devout anti-Nazi, because he's been punching those dudes in the throat in that movie, for him to show up at a huge meeting as he's getting the crowd all riled up, right? Pretty funny, pretty interesting. But the tension, one of the designs for random encounters during that BX time is it was a tension generator, right? It was, hey guys, as adventurers in a deep dark dungeon of danger, let's search around for secret doors and concealed doors. Remember that? The difference between secret and concealed doors? Let's search for the the single stone that we're supposed to lift up to find, I don't know, the Ring of Winter or a dragon orb or something that we might miss with our, without tapping with our 10-foot pole. And, oh, how long is it going to take you? Oh, it's going to take us 3 hours. Great. I get to roll 7 times on my random encounter chart before something rolls around the corner and wants to break into the room and attack you, right? Hey, we're not getting a chance to rest, or that. It was a very much a tension generator. But all I think sometimes there is a psychological difference between um, how we react and react to random encounters while the game is going on versus while they're not there at the table. There are many players who would say a random encounter rolled 3 weeks earlier isn't quite a random encounter if you've gotten 3 weeks to think about it. Whereas some may feel like you are breaking the immersion, that you don't know your world if you're rolling a random encounter at the table 30 seconds because the players decide to make a left turn and not go into the deep keep, but instead they decide to go down the lonely road towards the next town, right? Um, you're rolling dice to achieve a random encounter might be different for some people than going to your favorite website like ArtStation or something and finding a random picture and going, that's what you see on the road, right? Um, Randomness and what we consider to be random and what we consider to be immersive or immersive breaking or something, I think we have different definitions for it. And then we'll get into the difference between encounters and monsters and such. Um, Omen says, for Mythic GM emulator, it's about the likelihood, with likely equaling 75%, unlikely 25%, and 50-50 is, of course, 50%, obviously, and rolling a percentile die. If the roll is higher, it's a no. If lower, it's yes. Absolutely. Yep. As tension rises, noted by 1 to 10 per scene, and if the number drawn is higher, it's declared an encounter. Oh, by increasing the percentage chances as the tension rises. Yep, I absolutely agree with you, Tesla. Omen. Tesla says random encounters were invented for tabletop RPGs and are reasonably common there. The original rationale was that as characters crossed a world map with each square representing half a day's march. And remember, this was back when graph paper, we hadn't moved. This was before the hex paper, right? But anyway, each square representing a day, half a day's march. They could reasonably expect to meet a pack of wild animals or band of highwaymen every few days or so. The practical reason was to get players, you moved on me, to get players traveling at the speed of plot without obsessively checking behind literally every rock, shrub, and chair that they might encounter on the way. But in some games, it seems you can't walk 10 feet down a narrow dungeon hallway without getting ambushed by a somewhat illogical combat encounter with 9 mummy wizards. Hey, we interrupt this adventure to bring you this important random encounter, right? And the whole point of us talking, why I thought this would be kind of fun and ridiculous and educational at the same time, is that our relationship to random encounters oftentimes is going to be based on like when we started in the game, how we interact with the game. Do we find them useless? Why is it that we think of them that way? Et cetera, et cetera. Master Star Fox. Okay. Thank you for joining us in the Discord server there. All right. So since today is Monster Monday, and we're going to, of course, talk about like what types of random encounter tables there are, large ones, small ones, and what's on them. But since today's Monster Monday, we absolutely positively have to talk about, well, random like highwaymen or bandits or monsters that come across and why it is. I hear you, Master Star Fox. I don't know if a T850 Knight makes perfect sense unless that world has those things in it. Now, in a random encounter table, oftentimes what happens is not only was it was it designed to be a tension generator? And as Tesla pointed out, it's like it it has been used as a weapon. Yeah, Deadness is a Warforged knight, of course. Which would make actually makes a lot of sense. Um, Even a technological knight in the fantasy world might make some kind of sense based on the circumstances. It's not that, strangely enough, it wouldn't be that uncommon in Dungeons and Dragons. But oftentimes, not only was it designed for when you are at the dungeon, they were designed, random encounter tables were designed that there were enemies or creatures or what have you wandering around the dungeon. So if it's a literal castle with a dungeon down deep in it, or cave caverns, or you're traveling across the accursed desert, sometimes when you're crossing that desert, you have to bump and trip over some accursedness, right? It's when you're going through the the dark forest of despair, you're probably going to bump into some despair and a little bit of darkness on your way. And so the random encounter tables were there to fill out instead of listing 500 very extremely specified encounters with the things on your way to knock on the front door of the dungeon, there were things surrounding it. And then once you got into the dungeon, things would be wandering up and down the hallways and whatnot. And it was far easier to list, say, a word in bold letter beside the number 3 with maybe a blurb of like 3d12 orc guards or patrol or something and maybe even another line. They might have another line where they are walking up and down the hallways, scouting for enemies, or the creature is chowing down on food, or you see there's a caravan escaping the city that the PCs are heading towards, right? So you would have these little blurbs, and it wouldn't have very much information. And and let's talk about some of the terrible things, because for me, I'm sure you've already realized that I'm pro random encounters, but I'm not pro only random encounters. Whereas, as I know, one of our long-term participants or listeners, Rickard, it falls on the anti-random encounter side. And so I thought we would kind of like, in a fun way, a sarcastic way, kind of argue about it a little bit. So one of the strange things that happens when we bring up random encounters, we bring up falling damage, sometimes even if you bring up hit points or armor class, is this weird propensity for at least beginning players to shut off the creative context in their head to describe the random encounter itself, right? What I mean is, you are, let's say you're using the random, you picked your random encounter table, and the player characters are walking through the woods, and it's going to take them a week to get to the temple where the real adventure is going to happen, right? And all of a sudden now we've already made the decision in the random encounter that the random encounterness is in the way of our fun of getting to the temple of I don't know, the desecrated temple or something, where there's a big bad evil guy in there with its legions of evil things serving the big bad evil guy. And there's like a separation of sorts, like, oh, why are you inserting this thing I don't like? Because you've already preloaded our expectation of what a random encounter is. Why are you inserting this thing I don't like into a barrier to get to the fun? I want to go to the temple. My character wants to slay things. Why are we meeting these randos on our way to get there? The other method of thinking about random tables where it's like a problem is you're in the dungeon already, and we want to go fight the BBEG down deep into the desecrated temple, and we're down there, we're fighting its legions. decide to take a rest. We need to take a long rest to get our things back, and something comes knocking on the door because the game master grabbed some dice, rolled it, and you're like, oh, rolling your eyes like, why is there some rando trying to break the door down while we're trying to take our long rest? You're inserting your randomness into my long rest so that we can get our supplies, our capabilities together while we go fight the evil guy. And the why I call it strange is because the whole point of a random encounter table, and I'm going to quote Adam Coble, who is a professional dungeon master and I believe writer, one of the progenitors of Dungeon World, or is Apocalypse World. I think it's Dungeon World. One of the progenitors of that game, and he absolutely loves random tables, and he always calls random tables, random encounter tables, or random tables at all, are lore, right? If you were to list, I'm going to give you bullet points. I'm not going to number anything. I'll give you bullet points. If you type in, or if you see written down, humanoid raiders riding giant scorpions, and giant cobras, sandstorm, caravan of camel riding merchants, quicksand, oasis, extreme heat. Like, if you just saw bullet points of that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Without mummy lord, there's got to be something else in here. Distant hallucinations. I don't know. Heck, starving escaped slaves or whatnot. A giant pyramid. How about a sphinx? So you already knew what I was talking about 2 or 3 into that if I wrote them down as bullet points. Now imagine writing them down as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever the die roll is, matching the die roll. I often default to using the very last number and using the very last number of the die and go roll twice and combine, right? That's an easy-ism on a lot of roll tables, right? Roll twice on this table, rolled 1d4 more times on the table, and combine them together, right? And the point of what I think is missing from random tables since they faded away quite a bit, is that they are not designed to be an intrusion and a problem. They are designed to fill out your world and to give you inspiration. So as the player characters are walking across the accursed desert, as the game master, you're like, okay, this is going to be a 3-day travel. What happens in those 3 days, right? I mean, it's okay to say your world is this dangerous place, but if danger doesn't happen, it's just pretty much words. It's kind of a blow it out your ass kind of thing. But if you roll on a random table and you roll and go roll, scorpion riders, roll, second day. Oh wow, sandstorm, roll. Uh-oh, I don't know, escaped slaves or something. It's little trinkets, it's little hints of what your world is built around. And if you are a world creator, not only should a random table embody what your world is, but it's also, guess what? It's shorthand for foreshadowing the dangers that your players may get into. So if your setting has a big evil dragon, your players don't know it, your random table should have things like, oh, I don't know, a wandering sage and his apprentices studying lizards and dragons and looking for dragon lore. Maybe another random aspect of your random table might include dragonborn and lizard folk that are worshiping them. Maybe later on you might even find the carcass of a dragon somewhere. Now, since today is Monster Monday, and I've talked pretty much half the show without really talking about monsters, is the idea that you shouldn't have encounters, combat or otherwise, in a random table without the context of them fitting into your world, right? Um, like Star Fox, yeah. Um, yeah, the Dead Man says the Game Master's Apprentice Kickstarter currently had over $10,000 pledged of $950 goal. Game Master's Apprentice Kickstarter. That must be the must be probably a book dedicated to all the things a game master may need. I think one of the things we need is context, right? Like why first of all, it makes no sense that a person plans a game and then grabs a rando encounter table and decides to use something that doesn't fit into what they're using, right? Why I mean, sure, has there been someone out there who just grabbed some random encounter table and tried to use it when it makes no sense um, that mummy wizards are wandering around in a dungeon, unless, of course, the dungeon is filled with mummies, in which case, of course, it makes sense that they would be above that. Yeah, it's fine, dead man. Anyone who's in the Discord can absolutely positively go to the Game Master's Apprentice. There's a fantasy deck. Um, fantasy and science fiction RPG decks are a huge commodity in the current and Kickstarter realm, where someone will kickstart or Indiegogo or whatever. A series of cards that allow someone to like randomly pick or choose something. Like for this says 120 randomizer cards for all editions of fantasy role-playing games, over 1.7 million NPCs, events, story seeds, and more. And that's usually calculated by having one card have, say, an image on it, a name, maybe a location, a personality trait, a motivation for being there, um, an inciting event such as like hunger, being wounded, um, found a scroll, just graduated, going to visit family, et cetera, et cetera. So you start. So if each card has like 10 options on it, and then you have 120 of cards, you start multiplying those options. 120 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, that kind of thing, based on how you mix them up. And again, cards, while not dice, are a random table, right? It's a randomizer that you've inserted into it. So the first mistake made, yeah, it's a rando lurker, is the first mistake is using a random encounter table and not contextualizing why you're even doing it, right? Yes, I know there's this thing about random encounters being resource draining, right? But if you're going through the accursed desert, there's pretty much a good chance your resources are designed, the accursedness is designed to drain your resources before you get to the desecrated temple in the first place, right? Dante says, random encounters are hard. I ended up using them to plan encounters ahead of time. Make the chart, roll two, pick one, build a session, see where it goes. Exactly. And the thing is, like, um, as mentioned before, how random is that randomness, right? If it's 3 weeks before the game starts and you roll on a list and you roll 2 or 3 events, roll them, think about them, fill them out, pick the one you want, and then that becomes your adventure within 3 weeks. How different is that from, wow, I wanted my players to go to the Isle of Dread, but they decided not to go. Instead, they want to investigate this orphan kid pickpocket that ran away. Let me break out my urban random encounter chart. Roll, roll, roll. Think about it. Think about it. Hey guys, let me go get a slice of pizza. Come back, and now you have a session. Is that just as random? I've seen people, not seen and heard people on podcasts, YouTube, and things about DM um, inspiration, grabbing a random book and opening it up to a random page, taking random dice and opening up your monster manual and getting a random creature inside the thing and such. So, and then of course, yeah, and then of course there's this idea that uh, all random encounters are nothing more than monster fights, right? Oh, there's another monster. Oh, here's another monster. Oh, there's another monster, as opposed to building upon not just the reasons why they're there, but the impetus for having, all monsters. Where maybe we should have randos peeking from behind bushes, and weather events, and finding random things as you're moving along, moving along your life. Like, I got started a little bit later because for some reason, randomly, even though I've eaten the same meal over and over again, I had a random scatological event out of my anus. It's those kind of things, like, wow, I ate something that's kind of weird. Or you're driving down the street and some random person is just running naked from Costco. Or there's I don't know, a strange dog walks up to you without a collar and sits there looking at you languidly, like kind of panting and hoping you rub its head or scratch its chin. And you're like, why is there this rando dog? And 5 minutes later, you're like looking around like, should I take the dog with me? Do I take it to the vet or the pound? And then someone runs around the corner and it's like, oh, my dog got out of my fence. Does that happen often? Probably not. But could something like, is there a slight chance that a thing like that could happen? Right. It could be, yeah. A pizza monster. Deadman says there was the old deck of encounters from second edition D&D, AD&D, and I have a friend who used it to run encounters during lunch break at school. Right. Depending on your the classic hex crawl itself was built around the idea that every time you went to a undefined hex, we roll on the random table, right? It was literally built around that, where you would let's say there were 10 hexes between point A and point B, and there would either be a number or a symbol, like a temple or a village or a waterfall or a lake or something, a cave entrance. And between those specified locations in the hex crawl, you'd go each hex, and each hex would represent a certain amount of distance. So, and that would elicit so many encounters. And based on how fast or slow you went, you would get more or less encounters. And so it was a pressure cooker. It was a pressure timer. It was a tension generator. Hey, you've got 10 hexes. You can move 2 hexes a day. Maybe you only get 5 encounters. If we're going to move slow, that might be 10 encounters, right? And the idea of rolling randomly without context, I think, is an issue, and I think it's a psychological one. If you're rolling randomly across the accursed desert and you come across scorpion raiders or riders or what have you, why are they there? Are they neutral when they find the PCs, or do they want to bring them to their leader? Who is their leader? Where does that person come from? If they're riding giant scorpions, they must have some kind of skill. Are they nomads roaming around randomly, attacking people, or are they in league with a larger big bad who wants to use their services? Are they mercenaries hired to do a thing? Did they hear about the players' antics from the last session, and they're looking for them because they've raided one of these temples that are around in your world? What is the context of it? Are they hungry? Are they injured? Are they looking for ill-gotten gains? Are they looking to cause the players to suffer by stealing their food and water? Are they looking for slaves to trade on the open market in a local village, or even a nomadic slave trading encampment or something, right? Why would there be an aquatic encounter or monster or forest monster or jungle monster or mountain monster in the desert? Is it possible there might be one there? Sure, but maybe not. Maybe those rando orcs are adapted to the region, so they're dressed in, their faces are covered and they're dressed in robes and they're using scimitars and whatnot. Maybe they've got like bronze armor with a bit of chain linked to it as they're riding upon these giant scorpions and stuff. And that's where I feel like for some reason, we feel like we should turn off our creativity when we're already using our creativity for the rest of the game. Like, why wouldn't that be part of the? And then maybe that random encounter becomes the adventure, tracking down the Scorpion Riders after they took your stuff, finding out who they're in league with. Maybe the Scorpion Riders do that due to that encounter reveal a bit of information that the player characters need. For example, who they work for, where they're from, what their agenda is. Maybe this is something the players didn't. This is the encounter that, had you ignored it and just gotten to the front of the accursed temple, would have never been revealed if it wasn't for the Scorpion Riders revealing that the evil mummy wizard who controls this land didn't hire them to look for the player characters who rampage through a last empty temple, and they don't want the same thing to happen to their location. Yeah. Fox says, use D&D monster manual and write down monster and use different letters. I'm presuming finding a monster, I'm going to stretch that out a little bit, like finding a monster and then renaming it, recontextualizing it, right? Like, who's to say that you didn't want to pick, you found Dragonborn, but you're like, well, I'm going to make them lizard men, and those are the lizard men that have been blessed with power because they are in service of the blue dragon that lives out there in the Broken Lands, amongst plateaus and mesas and buttes in this dry landscape. And the ones that are loyal, the lizard men that are loyal to the dragon, are able to breathe out or shoot lightning out of their hands or from a staff or a weapon or a magic item or something, right? You're reflavoring maybe the thing that you rolled. Maybe you roll an ooze and you're like, ooze in a desert? I'm going to make this black pudding a quicksand monster. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah. Master Star Fox says, yeah, a mind flayer with phobia of sunlight. I don't know if it's phobia. I think they pretty much don't like it because it actually hurts them. I mean, yes, could they have a phobia? Of course. Could they also get burned by it? If I'm not mistaken, the classic, the original mind flayers had, and a lot of Underdark creatures had a were at a disadvantage in sunlight. I believe even Drow and their Drow elves and their magic and or weaponry suffered penalties and eventually were destroyed in sunlight as well. And who's to say that, like, you recontextualize your monster? Hey, this monster's from the Underdark. It's blind. It has milky white eyes. Maybe the monster has no eyes at all. Yeah, that's it. Our Underdark lizard folk have no eyes. They use scent and maybe sound or vibrations or something. So now you've recontextualized them in the game, and by doing that, you can link. There's no reason when you have a random encounter that the rando that shows up doesn't know what happened previously, right? If they know that the past village was destroyed by the PCs, and then they have a random encounter, why wouldn't they make a comment about that or figure out what it is? Yep. Yeah. Like Tesla says, it's not a phobia if it's a rational fear. Like my fear of heights. It's rational. I don't want to fall down and have a sudden stop at the bottom, right? But really though, yeah, vampires burning up in the sunlight, that's not a phobia. That's real. That's the thing. Yeah. Debbie says it's the fear of sunburn. Funny. But now with our monsters, with our encounters, since it is a Monster Monday, and we'll talk about other types of encounters, but today, why or what is the inciting event that would make an encounter with a monster even happen? Meaning, like, if you go camping, is it a random owl that's hooting in the background on a branch that pretty much is neutral to the party, right? The owl doesn't care if you're camping. It's probably hunting for food at night, It may be a deer or a group of deer roams close to the party. Maybe a bear wants to try to get the food that the campers decide forgot to tie up into a tree or something like that, you know. That's a funny meme. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we don't exactly know why the monster is there unless we make a reason for it, right? Like I mentioned before, you roll up a random okay owlbear. Let's go with some classic owlbears, right? Are the owlbears hungry and want to destroy the player characters? Do they have a collar and they're in use? Uh, they are used by or they are the pets of the local duchess or something that happened to escape from her zoo. Maybe they are her pets and she's going out feeding them so that they can go on a hunt and she loves them so much, oh so much. Maybe the owlbears are part of a wizard's experiment that either was released out into the wild because the wizard made a mistake and didn't care or whatnot. Willow Packard, the storyteller. Hey, what's up there? What's going? Thank you for popping on in. Maybe the owl bear is trying to defend its young. Maybe they are eggs or bears, cubs, or maybe they have a eggshell on their head, but their blower body is a bear. Or but being silly, maybe the owl bear is at a stream trying to catch food, like fish or something, swimming upstream, and the PCs come to the same shallow stream and are about to cross it, and they lock eyes. Maybe the monster is defending its territory and will only go after the yeah, and go after the party. Chasing them to the edge of their own territory. Who are like Mike Gould. Mike Gould, what's going on there? Thanks for popping in, dude. You're a busy man. Anyway, says Owlbear Reserve, and you didn't see the signs, right? Yeah, yeah. Maybe they've lived here this whole time. You're the invader, not them. By the way, if you guys don't know, Mike Gould is one of the most pivotal individuals behind the scenes of Nerdarchy's out of the box encounters. If you did not know that, a writer and layout artist and publication producer, immaculate. If you guys did not know, yeah. So learn these things, yes. But again, with a random encounter, it's not a matter of roll dice, guys. You see owlbears, roll for initiative. Is the owlbear? Is it a single owlbear? Are they having a territorial fight because of a mating season, and there's a female owlbear wandering around in the background while the two males start going at it? Maybe the owlbear senses one of the party members is a ranger or a druid and has a strange desire to meet them, not understanding why they have a connection, right? Again, with the mind, maybe there's mind control, or a powerful wizard is using the owlbear and controlling its movements and watching through its eyes and speaking through its mouth when the PCs come near a particular location. I could see the same thing happening with a druidic circle and going out into the dark woods, and they're using these as agents. Again, why the encounter? And are you sure? Let's say the encounter is you quantum ogred the encounter, right? Meaning like you had every intention for the PCs to bump against owlbears no matter which direction they went. Fine. Okay. So you did a quantum encounter. Michael says, thanks. I'll take writing credit. Art, edit, and design belong to the fine folks at Nerdarchy and Sarah Dillinger. I did not know that. Mind you, I pulled that out of my ass, but we know each other. You and I, we're down. But yeah, yeah, Sarah Dillinger, yeah, in Nerdarchy, yeah, writing credit and yeah, man, art and design and layout is an art amongst itself, even with its science though. Even writing itself has issues with it, because when you're writing, it's like your mind thinks of one thing, but then when you put it on paper, you have to contend yourself with what other people think. I think that's where Doug came in. But anyway, that's a separate thing. When using a random encounter table and and even if you have listed on it nothing but monsters, yeah, I agree with you, Mike. Yeah, language is everything. Context is everything, right? Um, so why? Because we're talking about context here. Why is the creature there? Why is why is the monster having bumping up against the players in the first place? Has its food source dwindled down, and the PCs now understand that the starving owlbear is not just some rando owlbear, but it's because there's some other greater evil that's removing the food source. Maybe an army is building and they're taking up all the food and they're doing all the hunting and gathering for the region, as armies are wont to do. And now all the wild animals are now starving and they're bumping up close to humanity when normally they wouldn't, right? Inciting event. So it's not just random encounters, but using random encounters effectively, especially when they're monsters. And how many are there? Are they? And what are they? What's their motivation? If there's a mommy and daddy owlbear and they're protecting their three young, maybe there won't be any combat at all if the druid decides to feed or save one of the baby owlbears that fell into a pit, right? Maybe the monster is actually feeding on something that it killed, right? Maybe it killed a local deer and it's eating it, and you come upon it and it thinks you're trying to take its food. Or maybe it doesn't attack at all because it's like, as long as you move away, I'm fine. Master Star Fox says a sword that is alive and wants to kill the player. In a like a crypt with spirits and undead, and you roll a random animated sword or weapon or something, of course something like that would be there, right? It makes sense for something to be there, even if you hadn't thought of it previously to the 30 seconds before you got stuck when you wanted to increase the tension to get the players moving, right? If they're in a dangerous place, they're covered in blood, they've killed a bunch of enemies, they've desecrated, according to the enemy, the bad guys, they've desecrated certain landscapes and things, and they've left a cornucopia of dead bodies behind them. Of course, there's going to be increased randomization of things hunting them down. So why not? You know. Willow says, "Does anyone here use a random encounter chart?" Good question. Because I usually err on the side of quantum ogre and pacing, right? And this was the argument I was hoping to get into with you guys that how random is it random if you've written down 5 encounters, very small encounters. You see, you wrote down an owlbear, you wrote down scorpion travelers. Like maybe you were just inspired. You wrote them down in a book or a paper or 3x5 cards or your Google Doc or your OneNote page or whatever. Um, but you were hoping to use them last session, you didn't do it. You were hoping to use them this session, didn't do it. 5 sessions later, you reach into your unused encounters, and like you're saying, Willow, you end up using that as one of your encounters. Is that random? Yes and no. Is it improv but not? You know, if you've already written the encounter, in your head you've already had the NPCs and their actions and stuff, and you didn't get to use it from last encounter, which meant anything you don't use is improv fuel, right? And then you use it now, and you, like you said, quantum ogre it now. And the difference between railroading and quantum ogering, by the way, real quick definition is, the quantum ogre is that despite the fact that players decided to go left, right, north, south, into the tunnel, on a boat to another island, the encounter still happens. But how the players are able to interact with that encounter has not been set in stone. So if you have an owlbear and one player says, I'm going to try to feed it, another player says we should sneak past it, another player says we should capture it, another player says we should kill it, as long as you leave those options open for them in that encounter, that's not a railroad, that's a quantum ogre, right? Anyway, so Mike says, stumbling into an owlbear cave and a mortally wounded owlbear is protecting its cubs. The owlbears are being hunted for sport. So who do you side with? The cubs or the nobles hunting them, right? And see, right there is a story. right? Okay, there's a huge story. First of all, why the hell are there owlbears out there? Second of all, one of them is injured by hunters. Where are the hunters from? Why are they hunting owlbears? Is this literally for sport and having fun? we hurt the owlbear cub, right? Maybe the players get an ally, and the players cross the ridge, and the nobles or hunters there are like, "Who are you on my land, stupid first level characters?" And the owlbears come up behind them like, "Yeah, we're with them, bastards," right? Who's to say that wouldn't happen? But that's a whole story off of some random die roll. 2d6 owlbears, die roll 5. Okay, without using some context. Mike Gould says inserting parasites works too. An intellect devourer can be inside almost anything and changes the context of the encounter. You know what? Why not just a stomach infestation? How many we know that dogs can get rabies, and while not common and could be random, maybe the owl bear is frothing at the mouth. Maybe that gives a context as to the danger of drinking the water, or there's some accursed creature. Something gets mummy rot and makes it run randomly in pain and fear or something, right? Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, an intellect devourer, a doppelganger could be. I don't know. Can doppelgangers mimic animals? Doesn't matter, right? But a doppelganger, and they meet some random bandits on the road, and one of them inside of there is a doppelganger. And um, again, the context, right? Not only should your random encounter fill your world, but even the randomness of it could fill your world. Like Mike goes on to say, a conflict between two sentient weapons whom have known each other for centuries changes the context of random treasure. Or he says, I will have preset encounters, but they're only triggered by my players. Perfect. Right? I have a random encounter mechanic where everyone at the table rolls a d10. I'll roll a d10. If I match one of the dice, an encounter happens. The idea is that the larger the force, the more noise and more chance to attract attention. Exactly. The PCs are running through the dungeon, blasting things with fireballs and thunderwave spells and murdering things, murder killing everything. Of course, they're making a lot of noise, and some other adversaries are going to come in investigating it. Or maybe the PCs go to slaughter 6 goblins. Maybe instead 5 stay and one runs off to go get reinforcements, triggering another random encounter. Or PCs kill 5 or 6 goblins, and a random predator smells it out, sniffs the blood, and goes to track down the PCs because they're blood covered and all that kind of stuff, and they're murder hoboing, and more predators start sniffing them out. Even like Michael says, diseases, fungal infections, spores. Um, um, Fox says a Shadowrun campaign, elf hobo playing a saxophone for money. Now here, because we're going to talk about this later on in the week. Something must be said for the random encounter that is literally totally random. And what I mean by that is, an elf hobo playing a saxophone for money may have nothing to do with anything in your world, but makes logical sense for an elf hobo playing a saxophone sitting on the corner for money, right? And what I mean by that is a doppelganger hiding within a group, a caravan group, might not be there to hurt the players. They might not be there to kill the king. They might just be traveling from one place to another. But what it does tell you, what it does reveal to the player characters is there are other things going on in the world, right? There are doppelgangers that exist in this world, and the doppelgangers traveling from one place to another. They're meeting a spy on the road when you want to introduce factions that have nothing to do with the current situation because they plan on traveling to the accursed desert. But the player characters know in your world there are spies and assassins, and they are members of certain factions trying to kill each other, letting them know that the world still turns whether they're there or not. When an encounter could be a town crier that says that one of the noble family members, yet another noble family member, was found dead in their room, slain by an enemy of the state, right? PCs are like, this doesn't have anything to do with me. We plan on going to Isle of Dread. But it might reveal information, it's background material. It is, listen, my world keeps moving whether you're there or not. Maybe you should be involved in it, PCs, but since you don't want to be involved and the noble family gets killed, maybe when you come back there's a civil war going on. Maybe that's the case, right? Maybe the prices of goods and services goes up. Maybe there are, after the slaying of yet the third noble in their bed, um, guards are now on the road in greater force with more expertise and wanting to question the PCs as they travel from town to town when normally the PCs could travel very easily. Maybe they're demanding more as the guards go from city to city, town to town, and now they're assembling an army and blah blah. None of this information would bump up against the player characters unless they randomly encountered caravans and animals who are starving because the now building army is taking all the resources, cutting down the forest, and now the Druid Circle is upset, and the Druid Circle, gathers together their owlbear allies and whatnot because the owlbears are starving and they want to take revenge, and building a story. And what happens? This is all from an accident, right? Michael says, I had a player who had a habit of recruiting kobolds through intimidation. Yeah, that's a thing too that happens where even if temporary, right? Some players are like, I'm going to talk to them to make them my allies. Yep. I don't know. Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, Master Star Fox is a player running into a black magic book on a tree stump. That might be a lure to get the players to try to open up the book, right? Or maybe the wizard that had the black magic book went off into the woods to go take a dump and left the book there while they were about to cast their ritual, right? You don't know that. So yeah, it's all about context. It's about shaping your story. It's about those things. I'm going to get into this last part of the chat before we get out of here. Michael says, my players encountered an entire caravan of doppelgangers. Wow. Who were wandering the world. They were being picked off by a hag coven. Ooh, might make the doppelgangers the good guys. Maybe, or not necessarily, right? Yeah. Willow says, does this elf play Mr. Saxabeat? I don't know. Maybe a little green onion. Maybe the elf hobo saxophone player might have some important information, even though the players just passed them on by, right? Maybe the saxophone player sees so many things. It's like, throw me some coin and I might talk to you a little bit, right? You never know. Rando encounter might lead to some more adventure. Yeah, thanks, Willow. Mike says, in Thule, this culture was based on an older military force called the Grey Hand, who were part of an older empire. Mike says, I did the book on the table, but the book and the table were a mimic. Yeah, I was going to say that. There's a monster that is a tree stump, excuse me, that has a little bunny rabbit on the top of the tree stump. And it was in... The first image was in the expedition to the Barrier Peaks. I can't remember what the name of the creature is, but yeah, there's a little bunny rabbit. Oh, it's stupid. Someone comes over to it, wants to pet it, and of course, hilarity ensues as it gets. Is it a wolf in sheep's clothing? Is that the name of the creature? I did not know that. I wonder why there really isn't a wolf in sheep's clothing monster. It would make sense. Oh, it is called a wolf in sheep's clothing. Oh, I did not know that. I did not know that. Yes, thank you very much. But anyway, guys, we're going to talk about random encounters all week. Tomorrow is Crunch Time Tuesday. Ooh, we get to talk about numbers and crunchiness in tabletop role playing games, especially Dungeons and Dragons and such. And how many creatures should be in a random table? How many dice should you roll? How do you pick and choose them? Those kind of things. Maybe you might have what's a good descriptor? Maybe you have a multi-faceted random table, meaning like you roll a d10 on the creature, you roll another d10 on the list of motivations, maybe you roll yet a third d10 on the like a rumor or a mystery or an oddity or a weather event, or maybe there's a chart like a 1d10 odd objects found around there, maybe a small sack of food, or a severed limb or something like that. Yep. Hey man, I'll try to get in here earlier too. I had to pinch a loaf earlier today, so yeah. Gray, a power sword of Grayskull? I don't think you're going to find that randomly, unless He-Man got his ass beat. You found that on the table. Although I was more of a Black Star fan myself. Willow says, "Gotta ask, is there a sheep in wolf's clothing? Because that seems like a dope monster." I was just thinking the same thing. Like, why isn't there a sheep in wolf's clothing? And the sheep, everybody runs away, and the sheep is like laughing and goes back with the other sheep. Like, the other sheep are like, "Cool, dude." Man, that'd be funny. Pretty hilarious. All right, but anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for bothering to be here at this hour if you're here in the States, and of course for even being part of the channel. So again, thank you very much. If you want to support the channel, please like, share, subscribe, follow, hell, comment. Comment later, even after the show is over. I do read all the comments in YouTube and whatnot, even going over to Twitch and becoming a follower over there. But anyway, all the information you need is located below the video, so you can find out where to find me on Facebook and other things, even Drive Through RPG, and check out Critical Hit Publishing, of which I am a writer. Guys, have a great one. I will see you later. Have a great day now. Bye. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.